with the DigiPass community of practice focusing on health and well-being for students. And I am here talking to Lindsay Summerhour. And Lindsay Summerhour is an academic counselor at Western University in London, Canada. Lindsay spent most of her time in an academic setting. She was previously a teacher before she started work at Western as a counselor. Her outside interests are based around goal setting and development and facilitation, and that also informs the work that she does as a certified coach practitioner. So these skills have given Lindsay this excellent background in supporting students while also encouraging them to find ownership in what they do and what they sort of make of their university experience. So again, Lindsay, thank you for coming and chatting.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
And is there anything else that you wanted to add about sort of what you do at Western or your interest? Do you feel like we've kind of covered it?
No, I think that's good. I mean, I think it's helpful for context to know that I work in an academic unit. So at my institution, we have academic unit specific advising. So it's not a centralized service for all students at the university. I do work with a specific subset of students in a particular program.
Okay, cool. That's good to know. Okay, so I think, as you know, the DigiPass community of practice, this section of it is really based around health and well-being. And so I think that right off the bat, it would be great just if you could talk us through how you specifically support your students when it comes to health and well-being and what that looks like for you. And perhaps if you could maybe take us through, I don't know, some instances of support or just, you know, talk us through what you do, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, we do a lot because we are faculty specific, but we're a faculty that doesn't have sub-departments of like more individual subject areas. So we wear a lot of different hats compared to some of our colleagues at our particular university, where I'm doing everything from academic considerations when students are ill and can't complete coursework and helping them navigate how they're gonna sort of get back on track with things, to program planning, program choice, dealing with, you know, if a student has to write an appeal for something, approving courses if they're going to go abroad on an exchange or a letter of permission to another school, doing student leadership training for our program ambassador team, planning recruitment events, running workshops, doing first year incoming student advising. Like there's just a lot of things that go on. We do individual appointments, we do drop-in when we're not at home, in our random rooms wherever we happen to be. Yeah, so we do a lot of different things, and I've been in my current role for 8 years now almost. And I think more and more how I sort of think of myself as helping students' health and well-being is that I see myself as a student's big picture person, for lack of a better term. I think when it comes to mental health and wellness, so many of the struggles that I see in my students, whether that's anxiety or overwhelm or a lack of motivation, kind of stem from them not seeing their own big picture, whether that's how they fit into the big picture of the university ecosystem of supports, or whether that's how what they're doing now in terms of a course or an assignment or a program, even how that's actually going to connect to the thing that they want to do in the future, or not knowing what they want to do in the future. And so not really having that sort of deeper personal connection to like their why. Why are they here? Why are they doing the work that they're doing? Why are they, you know, running themselves ragged, doing all this coursework and doing all these assignments when they don't see the connection to what's going to come next. And so I think helping them figure that out through conversation and a lot of questioning, and that's where a lot of the coaching techniques come into advising, is I sort of picture them as being like stuck in a wood and they're trying to find their path, but there's so many trees. And so my job as an advisor is through that conversation and questioning to kind of help them rise up above the tree line just for a minute, so they can kind of get that bird's eye view of what is the lay of the land here? Where do I want to go? And then we can navigate a path for like, what's your next step that's going to take you in the right direction where you're going to go? So I think they often just need some confidence that if they keep walking through the woods, they will get out of them eventually. And they need someone to check in with to say, where do I go? What do I do? And giving them confidence that if they do trip over a log or something on their way through the woods, like it's going to be okay. They can get back up and we can figure out what the next step is after that. So I think that's my main value.
And I was going to say, so do you find that you've been doing this for quite a while, and do you find that the students that you meet with, are you meeting with them kind of multiple times, or would you have maybe just one session with a student, or does it vary depending on, yeah.
Yeah, it's totally at the student's behest in our particular unit. We do not require students to ever seek out academic advising.
Okay.
It is totally voluntary service that we provide, and they can come as many times as they want. So I do have people who, it'll be a running joke and they'll say, oh, I'm here again, and I'm sorry to bother you with so many questions. And you always know that those people, you have to say, no, you can never bother me with too many questions. That's what I'm here for, literally what they're paying me to do. So please come back and ask what you want. But I think that also speaks to another major part of what I think I can do as an advisor to help students, which is scaffolding. And that comes probably from my education background and being a teacher before, where I do look at advising and student support as an educational dynamic. And scaffolding is where you have to understand first and foremost, where is the person at right now who's sitting in front of you? When I started 8 years ago, I used to tell my students, because I had been a high school teacher before and I knew, just how much more kind of coddled the high school system was than the university system. And I understood that there was a big gap and a big transition for a lot of them. So I used to say, we don't do hand-holding at university. We don't do any hand-holding here. We do high fives, right? Meaning you have to put your hand up for a high five. It's up to you to show us that you need help. And then we will meet you, we'll give you resources or information, and then you have to go do all the work yourself and then come back and tell us when you need another high five.
Yeah.
And what I realized over the years is that some students they don't know how to even do that yet. They need initially some hand-holding, because they don't even know how to raise their hand, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of that teach a person to fish model, but looking at this person and saying, to use another analogy, because I love them, to say, do they even know what a tackle box is before I say, here's how you go fishing? Like, do they know how to thread a line? Do they know what they need to put in their tackle box? Or are we really starting from square one? But then pay attention over our interactions together over the 4 years that they're in a program with me, making sure that we're moving towards independence. We're moving towards them being more confident and able to initiate seeking help on their own, because they're not going to have me when they graduate out of right?
Yeah. I really like what you said about sort of the student support being an educational kind of component. And I think that that's something that we don't often talk about really in the context of student support. And I'd be interested in maybe hearing a little bit, I don't know, just hearing a few more of your thoughts on that, and kind of if that's something that you came into the job thinking, or if that's something that's evolved over your time working with students, and sort of how that maybe influences what you do with students on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it has evolved a lot. I started out not really knowing what I was doing at all, and just learning the processes. And then the longer I was in it, I started to think a lot more about, like, what value can I bring to these people so that they're not seeing me as like the person with the answers. I'm the person who teaches them how to find the answers for themselves. And that started out more being how to find the answers about, where do I look for resources? Where do I find out what my requirements are? What website do I use for this? How do I know if I'm meeting all the things I'm supposed to be meeting, right? Very prescriptive advising, we would probably call it. And it sort of evolved into more, well, I'm not just here to help students figure that out. I'm here also to help them figure out, and this was just based off the questions they were bringing to me. Who am I? What is it that I want out of life? Why am I here, right? Because that pressure to succeed and excel at university is quite high for a lot of students. But if they don't have an internal motivation of why they're here and why they would work so hard, they find it very hard to excel, as we all do when we don't know why it is we're doing what we're doing. So also helping them, learn how to do that. And that was kind of the educational piece. And I got really interested in coaching when I became certified to do that. And a lot of research about integrating coaching techniques into advising. And I presented at a conference last year about it, about how we can as advisors kind of help fill that gap to be those big picture people that students can come to say, I don't even know what's wrong, but I know something's not right.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do about that, right?
Yeah.
They needed a safe starting point for that question. And
Yeah.
not to have it be, you know, kind of scary for them, the way it might be to go to, say, psychological services, but just kind of a friendly face to say, well, let's ask some preliminary questions and figure out what resources are there and whether you want to do them or not, you know, just like
Yeah.
kind of a safe starting point.
Well, that's a really fantastic place, because it's almost like it's a, you know, it is really scary to go see a counselor or to go to kind of psychological services. I think has a lot of stigma attached to it, even though it shouldn't. I think that there's a real students really struggle to want to engage. And so I think you're right, being able to fill in that gap in between, I think is a really positive, it's a really positive thing, because it allows students to maybe start engaging with some of those questions a little bit more without feeling, perhaps feeling the stigma that they would if they were asking those same questions to another department within the institution.
Yeah. And I know this is maybe jumping ahead in the conversation a little bit, but
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges in working with students in terms of health and well-being is there are these really sort of fine and shifting lines between things that we would classify as mental health concerns and things that we would classify as kind of normal challenges of young adult development, right? Like increasing levels of personal accountability and responsibility for managing your own time and taking initiative, or career indecision and wondering if you're on the right track, or, you know, just for the first time maybe having to take on intense deadlines without mom or dad or high school teacher over your shoulder saying, it's okay, remember you got this tomorrow, remember you got this tomorrow.
Yeah.
And those are, I think, when it's hard to figure out where is the line between those, that can be really hard for students. And so they don't know, should I get on that, you know, that wait list to get an appointment with psychological services, or should I go to the peer support drop-in center for time management? Like, they might not know which one is the most appropriate for them.
Yeah, and I don't actually, you know what, I don't think that you're jumping ahead in the conversation at all. I think that it makes a lot of sense maybe to talk through some of the challenges now, because I'd be interested. So like, if you have a student who's coming to you with those sorts of problems, are those the conversations that you're having about, okay, well, is kind of psychological services the place for you to be, or should you be talking to kind of the peer mentorship program, or are those the conversations that you find yourself having?
Definitely. I mean, and I wouldn't put it so explicitly to the student, because I think it
Yeah,
might feel a little heavy that way, but it's
or
more about really about questioning techniques and really about asking, oh, it sounds like you're saying that this is really stressful for you. Can you tell me a bit more about like where that stress comes from, or like why is this stressful? There are these different options on campus. Do you think one might be more helpful to you than another? But I think in terms of mental health supports, as you said, there is a stigma towards it, which there shouldn't be. But I think maybe just because of the logistics of resources at institutions as well, there are not enough resources for anyone to just be able to walk into, say, a psychological services necessarily and say, I'm just finding it really hard to manage deadlines and it's really stressing me out. Can I talk to a counselor? And I think
yeah,
students are knowing that. And so I worry sometimes that because of the way we separate out these kind of like professionalized supports where they can go and talk to a professional versus like, this is the peer support area that's like pretty open and not really confidential, or it's a drop-in center, or there's a pretty stark divide on a lot of campuses in terms of what the offerings are. And I worry sometimes that students might even feel like their issues need to be severe in order to get support. And I think maybe we also need to normalize that, like, it's actually pretty common to feel intense anxiety the first time you deal with that crunch week of final papers being due. It's totally normal. Here's the array of supports that are available for you. You can come talk to somebody like me, you can talk to a learning skills counselor, or you can go to psychological services. Depends what you feel like you want to do. And any of them are okay, and any of them validate the stress that you're going through.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. And I think that something that you said earlier, that kind of struck me is you were talking about, how you've used some of your coaching skills, and you were talking about, speaking at a conference last year about that. And I'm curious as to how and if you see kind of the way that academic counselors work is maybe changing. I mean, obviously you're looking at it in a different perspective. And do you think that that's something that's happening within maybe your team, or do you think that that's something that's happening at Western, or do you think that that's something that's kind of changing across, I don't know, the I don't want to say the industry, but sort of the area of work that you do, because maybe there are some of these challenges that are being identified that perhaps touch on various different aspects of student experience, and so then perhaps the standard ways that maybe student support used to be dealt with isn't actually fitting anymore.
I mean, I think there's definitely a movement that's happening across the profession of advising. Certainly when I was doing the research in prep for the conference, there was a lot of other places, other schools, other countries, other provinces, other states where things are shifting towards that, right? And there's been a lot of growth in the academic advising world in, the last couple decades, from mostly prescriptive advising to what we might call more developmental advising, or what we might move towards appreciative advising, and then coaching pieces. And they're all kind of, but they're all moving towards, I think, as many support services are even in broader communities outside universities, more towards seeing people as holistic individuals rather than as individual symptomatic issues that need solved. And I think that's great. I think that's really good. I think that one of the challenges is trying to provide that level of holistic support if you don't have the resources to feel like you have the time to spend with individual people to be able to get to that level, right? I mean, I think I'm very lucky in the unit that I work in, that we have structured our work so that when a student books an appointment, it's an hour. It's a whole hour. I know a lot of other units, people I've talked to, it's maybe 20 minutes. I don't think I could get to the level that I get with people in 20 minutes. So I think there are some logistical barriers maybe sometimes to doing that kind of work and shifting the way that we're doing things. And I think there's different expectations for students as well. From when I started, even of what an academic advisor might be able to do with them.
Really?
So we also have to rise to that occasion. Absolutely.
Okay. So what do you like? Would you say what does that look like? How is that different now than it was when you started?
Well, I mean, I think even back to when I was in university myself, I would certainly have never gone to anybody on a university campus in, the early 2000s and said, I really expect that they're going to see me as a whole person and be interested in who I am. I think I really felt like, I got to go with my question, and I got to be prepared, because they are only going to give me information. This is not a relationship. This is not like an educational connection that's happening. And I think students expect a little bit more. They expect us to be humans and not information dispensing machines. Which I'm happy about. I don't want to be an information dispensing machine.
That's actually, that's kind of nice. That is kind of nice.
It is. I think it's nice.
Oh gosh, we all just want to be people.
Yes, I think we do. And I think that really helps to build those relationships with people over time.
No, that's interesting. I'd be keen maybe if there are any other sort of challenges that you've identified. I think you really touched on a big one with the mental health stigma, and kind of the support that you offer that's sort of quite varied in comparison to what was maybe previously offered. But I'd be keen to maybe hear if there are any more challenges that you've identified, or anything else that you think that you've sort of noticed in your work over the past few years.
Yeah, I mean, I think another one that I see often that I really find difficult to help students through is that we don't, as a culture, seem to teach students to plan their lives with buffers in mind, whether those are buffers of time, attention, or mental and emotional space. And I should say, with all of these things, my experiences, or I don't think any advisor's experiences necessarily are representative of the population at large.
Yeah.
Our experiences are all representative of a small subset of the population that has challenges and seeks support, right?
Yeah.
Whatever
Yeah.
grade those challenges are. So it's important to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah.
That we're not talking about an entire generation of people or all students. We're talking about the people who show up in our offices, right?
Yeah.
But what I mean by this idea of like, we don't teach them to plan buffer time is that I work with a lot of students who express a lot of pressure to kind of max themselves out in all respects. You know, they've got to take the full course load, and they've got to get excellent grades, and they've got to have really stellar co-curriculars, and they've got to work part-time outside of school, even though school's a full-time job, and they're trying, at least some of them are doing full-time jobs outside of that, like full-time hours. And I think what this means is that they are so meticulously planned out and overscheduled that when a sudden change is thrust upon them by life, as life is notorious for doing, thrusting changes at us, whether that's a small change within a particularly busy week where they really didn't feel like maybe they weren't even going to get anything done as it was, they weren't going to meet all their expectations, or if that's a bigger change that impacts an entire semester, the fallout and stress upon students, I think, is much greater than it could be if we perhaps were better as a society at teaching them how to explicitly plan their lives with buffer time in mind. Like, don't max yourselves out. Don't plan to be busy every single day of the week. You know, and I think we would have to stop, this is a much bigger societal issue, but we would have to stop valuing absolute maximization of productivity and busyness in individuals, which we're not very good at. We value that a lot, right? And I think procrastination is a really good example of like a symptom of this. When I talk to procrastinators my own age about when they were in university, you know, and writing a paper the night before, I was not one of these people. I'm way too stressed out to procrastinate, so I couldn't do that. But when I talk to people my own age who are procrastinators and they would write a paper the day before, the night before, there's this certain distinct sense that that was a conscious choice because they wanted to spend their time doing other things. And so they were okay with perhaps the natural consequence of that, which is like maybe not getting that grade of marks. But that was a choice, and they had agency in that. And I think what I'm seeing more and more is students procrastinating, but truly feeling like they have no agency to do it otherwise because there are so many demands on their time and attention. They literally have no other way to do it in their minds. And I think that's what's really hard to help them work through is, you know, there's a really simple, you know, logic flow chart that's like, are you happy? Yes, keep doing what you're doing. No, do something else. Then re-ask the question. But if you don't feel like you can let any of the balls drop, you don't really see how you have any agency to change anything or do anything else. And I think it's that kind of like mental paradigm and perspective that it's the most difficult to maybe work with students to say, you actually do have the agency to let a ball drop, but are you willing to? Are you willing to let a ball drop, and which one, right? And that opens up a whole other thing about, well, who are the balls important to? Are you holding this one up for your mom? Are you holding this one up for your peers? Are you holding this one up for that particular prof that you want to write you a recommendation letter? Like why are you holding all these balls? So it gets very complicated very quickly. Which is why I couldn't do 20-minute appointments.
And we circle back. I like that. Well done. But I also, do you know what I really like about what you're talking about right now is that I actually think, you know, what you're talking about is so relevant just in life. So to students, but also just to people, you know, to people in life. And I think probably, you know, some of the things that you're talking about, you know, I recognize some of that behavior, like in my peers, in myself, in other colleagues. And I think a great thing about the way that you're engaging in what you're doing is you're starting to have these conversations when students are, you know, right out of high school and right when they probably are starting to maybe build those expectations or really cement those expectations. Because I think what you said before was really on the nose when you talked about in high school, students have parents and they have teachers kind of just, keeping track of everything. And I mean, not to like a maybe overbearing, well, I guess that depends on what the home you're in. But I think some students probably have it much more overbearing than others. But at the same time, there's always some sort of level of someone checking in on you. And university is probably the first time that you actually set up all of those expectations for yourself. And then to have someone kind of be the voice that says, do you really need to do that? From such a young age, I think is such a fantastic thing, because hopefully then it sets them up not to, because once you've done that through all university, then it makes sense that you would do that through postgrad and then into your corporate life and so on and so forth. And I suppose I think it's a really fantastic thing to start having those conversations early, because hopefully then they're learning better habits, I think.
And that's why the scaffolding thing is so important, right?
Yeah.
Because people are on a total spectrum of that. And there are students that I never see, no one in my office ever sees, because they actually have those skills already and they're good.
Yeah.
And they just like carry on tickety boo and then they graduate, done.
Yeah.
You know, but for the ones who aren't, they're at varying levels. And sometimes I'll get to the point with a student where I actually say to them, we talk a lot, one of my favorite things to talk with them about is like their comfort zone, their stretch zone, and their panic zone. It's like concentric circles. And, we don't want to live in the comfort zone because no growth or learning happens in the comfort zone. We also don't want to live in the panic zone. So they have to figure out within the stretch zone, where are they going to live? Close to the comfort zone, at the edges of panic, but not quite going over the edge. And they're going to learn that over the course of 4 years. And sometimes once I use that with them enough, if it's somebody that I see multiple times, I can say to them, when you're thinking about taking this action, do you think that's in your stretch zone? How close is it to the edge of panic? How do you feel about that? So you can start to build these relationships with them if you see them enough times, if they come in, to be able to help them visualize that process within themselves.
Yeah.
And this is, again, I am not a mental health counselor. So this is for people who need regular developmental anxiety and stress support. This is not for people with diagnosed mental health issues that I would be working with, because that's not my goal.
No, of course. I was also going to say something that you spoke about that I think is really relevant right now, is the idea of, the society's value on productivity, and how we are all, that we value as a society doing things and doing things quickly and, doing a lot of things. And I think that it's really relevant right now because the opportunity to do things is just, it's severely diminished, I would say. And it's changed. It's just changed a lot. Yes. And so I'd be interested in maybe hearing you kind of talk about coronavirus and how that's impacted like what you do and the way that you interact with students and what it's kind of meant for you, I guess, in this professional context.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of like the productivity and busyness, I think there's so much about our personal circumstances for each of us in our home lives that has a big impact on that, because I've talked to friends and colleagues who they feel like actually not having other things to do and working from home has increased their own personal pressure to maximize productivity for work, because there isn't a timer that says, okay, go home now. They're already home. So maybe they feel like, well, I should use what used to be my commute time to keep working, or I should, or they just don't notice, right? And it carries on. I'm pretty lucky. I have two small humans at home who know one of them knows what the clock says. And so he's in here every day at 4:30 going, you done work now, Mom? Like every day on the button, unless he's out somewhere. But like so I have an easier time, I think, separating work life from home life while working from home.
Yeah.
But I think there is like both sides, right? We're so used to being productive and so busy that maybe we do get a little antsy with all this like free time, this empty space, this buffer space that sort of external circumstances have said, you shall have buffer space, right? You shall have time to sit and think and not do stuff, right? Again, depending the circumstances of our households. I know some people feel like they have less time now than they did before. The kids home all the time, but it really varies person to person. I think in terms of my work with students, it was definitely a learning curve for us when the pandemic hit and things closed down. But I feel very lucky that I had a fantastic team who was really like game for innovation. Like we said, okay, this is a circumstance, you know, our internal team motto is kind of been like, whatever, we can do that, right? Like, we'll figure it out. We'll find a way to say, we can't do this the way we used to. How can we make ourselves accessible and welcoming and here for students and helpful from a computer screen? Like, what do we have to do? So there were some growing pains there, but I think we've done a really great job. But I think for students that I've talked to, while they miss some of the in-person aspects of university, first of all, summer is usually not as in-person for us anyway. Being remote with students is pretty common in the summer because most of our students don't live in the town of the institution in our program. So there's a lot of phone appointments and online interactions anyway. But I've noticed way fewer no-shows for appointments. I have had almost a perfect track record of people showing up for their appointment when they book it, which is definitely not the case, especially in the winter here in Canada, where if it's a snowy day, you got a good chance that 75% of your appointments are not showing up for the day. So, you know, like they might just be like, well, it's too cold out. So I've had almost no-shows, and I think that's a really positive aspect of it, right? I think the students are somehow they're more prepared for conversations with very detailed questions. Thought about it maybe more in advance. You know, we used to have drop-in, and people would kind of come in just saying, well, I don't really know why I'm here, but like I kind of wonder about this and I kind of wonder about that. And that has been mostly replaced by email, that service in particular. So they have to articulate what they want, and they have to say, here's you know, what I can do. And our response time on email, I would say, has gotten a lot better because we do not have people walking in and then taking up your time for a while. Like, you can actually really focus on getting expedient answers out to people when that is what they need. Right? Because not everybody, with all the different hats that we wear, not everybody needs a lengthy conversation. Like, coaching people is not the majority of my day. Most people still need that. So
that's really interesting. That's I like that you've taken a global pandemic and put such a positive spin on it.
I'm always looking for the positives. I mean, if we can't look for those and try our best to hold on to them, I just think life's a lot harder. So.
No, I think that's awesome. Oh gosh. And so when it comes to the sort of challenges and the things that students are coming to talk to you about, are you finding that it's similar in kind of during pandemic times that it was previously? Or are you finding that they're talking about, you know, is there more of a, I know for over here, the borders closing was a real struggle, I think, for a lot of student support offices. You know, the idea that students might not be able to get to where they need to go or be able to get home, but then I appreciate that sort of the European context, it's a little bit different from the North American context.
I mean, we have one border, it's closed, so I don't know.
Lots of coastline, lots of coastline.
Lots and lots of coastline. But I mean, I think with those kind of questions, the biggest one I've been dealing with right now, because students are registering for courses, is international students who are, because we're offering a lot of online things to sort of help people make more flexible decisions for the upcoming fall winter year. A lot of international students asking about, well, what if my time zone doesn't match the time of this online course? Because some of our profs are offering courses that are still synchronous. So you have to get it at that time. It's not going to be recorded and available later. So it's about just talking with them and saying, well, you really have to make a choice there. You're either going to commit to being in class at 3:30 in the morning, or you can pick another class, because there are lots that are not synchronous and you can do them whenever you want. So just, again, coaching them through decision making and saying, you know, you can't change the system that exists, but like, here's the decision-making factors and what do you want to do from here? Right? And a lot of reassurance that, like, in each conversation, and if you have any more questions, you know where to find me, and I'm always here to answer another one. So.
That's fantastic. Well, that's really interesting. And I think it's really interesting, you know, the idea that you're giving students kind of that autonomy to sort of say, well, you can go to this class, but it just means that your day will be the nighttime where you live. And I think that that's a really interesting conversation to have with them, you know, and to say sometimes when it comes to making choices, it's just difficult because perhaps you really want to take the class, but that's just not an option. And, you know, being able to talk someone kind of through, I assume, all of the associated emotions that come along with that.
I mean, I think agency and empowerment is really like one of my favorite things to try to give to people, right? And that's one of the things that I will explicitly call out with them in terms of like, what is the emotional experience that they're having. So when they're talking about something, I'll say, wow, it sounds to me from what you're saying like you feel fairly disempowered, or like you don't have a lot of agency. Is that accurate to say? Right? And let them kind of say, yeah, I am feeling that way, or no, not really, or whatever. But if they are, then I can tell them, because sometimes students are very resistant to a support person, because I think sometimes they perceive that I'm like the man of the institution, right? And I'm there to block them or something. And so when I asked that question, it sounds like you feel like you don't have a lot of agency here, or you're very disempowered. And he was, yes. I said, well, you know what one of my goals is? To make you feel as empowered as possible as we can within the things I cannot change and you cannot change. That's all I'm here to do. So, and usually I can sense like the, you know, if I'm in person or on Zoom, I can sense the like, oh, this person is actually on my side and interested in helping me. Okay. And it kind of gets them out of that resistance space.
I suppose then it sort of changes the kind of relationship, and it's not an us-them relationship. It's a, you know, the both of you trying to not even solve anything, but just trying to make your way through together, I guess. That's really interesting. Okay, so I think that we've, you know, it seems like we've talked around a lot today. And I think the last thing that I wanted to ask you, and just a really quick answer, but you seem so passionate about what you do, and you know that you care a lot about the students and about sort of helping them move through and navigate the university experience as best they can. I'd be really interested to hear just really quickly what inspires you in your job.
You know, it really is. It is those moments. This is going to sound so cheesy, but it's absolutely true. It is those moments where I am working with somebody and I can see them through the course of our conversation have a light bulb moment of either greater self-acceptance or greater self-confidence or greater self-agency. Like one of those three things. When, you know, if I've talked with somebody who was really going down one sort of, you know, post-graduation path, and through a course of questioning, you know, she said, you know, I don't even know why I'm doing that. I don't even know why I'm doing that, but now you're making me see that like I'm doing that all for other people and not for me. And the relief and the brightness of like, oh my gosh, I can look into other options because I thought this was what I had to do, but I don't have to, right? That increased agency and empowerment and self-confidence and frankly self-love is just like, if I can increase somebody's amounts of that by just a little bit, then I'm happy. My day.
That doesn't sound cheesy at all. That sounds wonderful. I feel like that sounds like the epitome. Like that's a lovely thing to be inspired by about what you do. That's fantastic. Yeah.